It still pisses me off how AMC's The Walking Dead handled Carl Grimes. Not because he died, but because of everything we lost when he did. In the comics, Carl wasn't just Rick's kid. He was the future of the story. He was supposed to face the Whisperers, carry Rick's legacy, and even become the guy who tells the entire story of The Walking Dead to the next generation. Instead, the show killed him off, threw his storyline at random characters, and left fans asking the same question ever since. Why the hell did they waste Carl Grimes? Today we're talking about the Carl Grimes we never got, and why losing him was the biggest mistake The Walking Dead ever made. Let's start with who Carl Grimes actually was supposed to be. From the very beginning, Carl was way more than just Rick's kid. In the comics, he was brutal and compassionate. He made decisions no kid should have to make, and it completely shaped who he became. Take this moment from the comics. Carl straight up executes Ben after Ben murders his own brother. It's one of the darkest scenes in the early story, not just because Carl pulls the trigger, but because he instantly starts questioning whether he's turning into a monster. The show never let Carl have that moment. Instead, they gave the entire moral dilemma to Lizzie and Carol in The Grove, which, fine, The Grove is an amazing episode, but here's the problem. The scene was supposed to belong to Carl, because that's who Carl was, a kid forced to decide when mercy ends and survival begins, and that was the whole point of his arc. By the time the comic hits the prison arc and beyond, Carl's already a survivor who's seen more than half of the adults around him. He's not just tagging along anymore, he's questioning Rick's choices, he's pushing back, he's willing to kill to protect people. The show hinted at this a few times, like Carl shooting that one kid trying to surrender in season 3, but then they just pulled back entirely. After that, AMC turned Carl into a side character who mostly hung around in Alexandria, and that's where they started failing him. Instead of letting Carl keep growing into the story's future, they kept him stuck in the background, either playing second fiddle to Rick or acting like a generic rebellious teenager. Carl's foundation in the comics is that he's ruthless and human. He's the kid who has to become a man way too fast. That's why his later arcs hit so hard, because he's carrying all of this trauma but still trying to build something better. The problem is, the show never trusted Carl to be that complex, whether they weren't confident in Chandler or just wanted to go in a different direction with the story.
They don't know what the fuck they're doing.
And nowhere is that clearer than in the arc that should have been his coming of age. The Whisperers. If there's one place where Carl's missing story hurts the most, it has to be the Whisperers. Because in the comics, this entire arc was Carl's, not Daryl's, not Henry's, who didn't even exist in the comics. It was Carl's. And frankly, in the source material, the Whisperer arc was barely even Rick's. That's saying something. This is where Carl meets Lydia, Alpha's daughter, who's basically growing up in a world where wearing walker skin is just normal. The two of them start this intense, messed up relationship that's part teen hormones, of course, part party trauma bond, and part political powder keg. The show decided to replace Carl with Henry. And look, I have nothing against Henry, but let's be honest, the dude was a blank slate. Carl's bond with Lydia mattered because he'd already been through hell. He understood the violence and trauma the Whisperers were living in, and that in which Lydia was facing. So when Carl defended Lydia, it wasn't just a teenage crush, it was him choosing compassion over fear. Now, that's a massive turning point in his story. In the comics, Carl's the reason Lydia is even allowed to stay in Alexandria. He stands up to Rick. He fights his own people. That's how much he's grown. He's rising everything for someone he barely knows because he sees the bigger picture. But the show gave all of that weight to Henry, and then they killed him off. So by the time the Whisperer War really kicks off, there is literally no emotional stakes left. Instead of Carl's connection to Lydia giving us an insider's look into the Whisperers, we got, well, Daryl just kind of glaring at people in the woods, and Carol running around like a chicken without her head. Pun intended for Henry. In the comics, Carl is in it during the Whisperer War. He's on the front lines. He's making decisions that affect the entire community. He's becoming a leader, not just some kid who needs protecting. So yeah, the Whisperers was Carl's coming-of-age story. It should have been the moment that he stepped out of Rick's shadow completely. But instead, the show erased him and replaced his story with characters who, let's be real, nobody cared about nearly as much. Oh, and I didn't even mention the whole Lydia licking Carl's eye socket thing. Yeah, I'm glad we never saw that one. And if losing Carl in the Whisperer arc wasn't bad enough, it gets even worse when you realize what we missed out on in the very end of the comics. Now, let's talk about the Commonwealth, and this is where the show's version and the comics completely split. In the comics, Carl and Rick, who are both very well alive and involved in the story at this point, arrive at the Commonwealth after the Whisperer War. Carl's still a teenager, not some grown-up yet, and he's right there while this new society tries to rebuild civilization. But here's the thing, the Commonwealth isn't the paradise that it pretends to be. There's a whole upper class versus working class problem brewing under the surface. People are getting tired of living under old world rules, and it's Rick and Carl who see it for what it is, a powder keg ready to blow. Carl is right in the middle of the conflict. He's older, more confident, and he's helping Rick figure out who can be trusted. He's watching his father become this political leader, but he's also dealing with the trauma of everything he's been through. And then it happens. Pamela Milton's son, Sebastian, shoots Rick Grimes dead in his bed, which is a natural time to plug my most recent video all about Rick Grimes' death, so be sure to check that one out in the link above. Anyway, after Rick is shot, who finds him? Carl. Carl is the one who discovers his dad's reanimated body, sobbing over Rick's corpse, and then he has to put a bullet in his head to actually put him down. That is one of the most gut-wrenching moments in the entire comic. After that, Carl's life is forever changed. He stays in the Commonwealth. He helps hold everything together after Rick's death. He becomes the living connection between his father's ideal and the future. Then, we get the time skip. The last issue jumps forward years into the future, where Carl's a grown man with a family of his own. He's raising his daughter, remembering the world his father fought for, and refusing to let people forget how bad things used to be. He's the one literally telling the story of The Walking Dead to the next generation. Now, compare that to the show. Carl dies way back in Season 8, and Rick is taken out of the show in Season 9 long before the Commonwealth ever shows up. So AMC had to find someone else to stand in for Carl's role and fill the void of Rick not being in the script. That's why Judith suddenly starts getting lines about wanting a better future, or talking about Rick's legacy, but let's be real, she's too young. She didn't know Rick Grimes, even if it was her father. She just hasn't been through the same trauma that Carl did. She also didn't lose Rick in the same way that Carl did.
They don't know what the fuck they're doing. You understand that?
So those speeches don't land the same way at all. In the show's finale, they try to set up Judith and RJ as the future, but the emotional weight is just gone, because the character who was supposed to be there, the one who had earned it, was Carl. Carl's comic ending is powerful because it's about legacy. It's about a kid who survived the apocalypse and grew up determined to protect the new world his father died to build. The show didn't just lose Carl, it lost the ending of The Walking Dead and the overall heart of its story. And the worst part? AMC didn't have to kill Carl, and that brings us to the people who've taken the blame for the decision, the writers and Chandler Riggs himself. So here's the part that makes fans furious, including me, as you guys know. Carl didn't have to die, and despite what some people say, it was not because Chandler Riggs couldn't handle the role. Let's get this straight, and I could already see your dislikes coming. Chandler Riggs was killing it in that role. After Lori died, the scene where Carl has to put his mother down, he nailed it. The prison scenes, he was standing toe-to-toe with Andrew Lincoln in some moments. Alexandria, he gave Carl a believable edge without making him too cartoonishly emo. But after the prison arc, it's like the writers just gave up on him. They kept him hanging around in Alexandria, gave him the occasional rebellious teenager moment, and then barely let him evolve past Rick's kid who just wants to sneak out of the walls. Then came the bombshell. AMC decided to kill off Carl in Season 8 just out of nowhere. Chandler Riggs didn't even see it coming, and neither did his family. And mind you, this was right after Chandler Riggs had bought a home in Georgia to be closer to set. I know there's a lot of rumors out there saying that it was because he wanted to go to college, but that's just not the truth, and even Chandler's father confirmed that. And there were even reports that Scott Gimple didn't originally plan for Carl to die, and it even blindsided the cast. Fans were livid. I was apoplectic, and not just because we liked Carl, but because it made no sense. The Whisperer arc was right around the corner. Carl's prison talks with Negan were coming. The Commonwealth Arc was coming. Carl was supposed to inherit Rick's world. Instead, the show had to scramble to give Carl's storylines to Henry, Judith, who didn't even exist at this point in the comics, or just random characters who just couldn't carry that same weight. People sometimes say that Chandler Riggs was a bad actor, and I'm sorry, but that's just total crap. He was a kid actor who grew into a teenage actor, and sure, he had some awkward moments, but so did every kid actor on Earth. What were you expecting, Marlon Brando? To me, all that really matters is that all of his biggest scenes were just absolutely solid. Killing him would be an assassination to the show, and it really was. And Carl's death scene itself, it's not even bad because of the acting, it's bad because it just didn't fit the story. As a matter of fact, his death scene may have been his best performance, but it literally just shouldn't have happened. The Walking Dead has always been about survival and the future. Killing Carl killed the future, and that's why from the moment Carl died, the show felt like it was wandering. Because it really was. Carl was supposed to connect the beginning of Rick's journey to the end of the apocalypse story. Without him, the final seasons were just missing their heart. So yeah, the problem wasn't Chandler Riggs. The problem was the writers deciding Carl didn't matter anymore and throwing him away like Andy threw away Woody in that dream in Toy Story 2. And that's why the final blow to The Walking Dead's legacy wasn't just losing a character, it was losing the character who was supposed to tell the story to the very end. It's honestly to the point where his death had more of a negative impact than Rick leaving the show only a few episodes later at the start of season 9, which also adds so much negative weight to the death of Carl. Like, it's one thing to maybe have just killed Carl, but losing two characters who were the central focus of the show in only a few episodes' time is just a death blow. So here's the bottom line. Carl wasn't just some kid in a cowboy hat. He was the future of The Walking Dead. He was supposed to be the bridge from Rick's brutal world to a better one. He was the kid who grew up in hell and still believed things could change. And he was the one who was meant to tell this entire story to the next generation. Instead, the show killed him off in a sewer. They handed his storylines to characters who didn't earn them. And when the show finally reached its ending, it felt hollow because the guy who was supposed to be there wasn't. Imagine how different it would have felt if the series ended like the comics, with Carl telling his daughter about Rick Grimes and everything he sacrificed to rebuild the world. That was the real ending to The Walking Dead, and the show just never gave it to us. So yeah, I'm still salty about it, because Carl Grimes was The Walking Dead, and unfortunately, we never got to see him become who he was meant to be.